So, yeah, thank you for anybody who's joining us. It's JP Smith and welcome back to Boxing Saves Lives. And today I'm interviewing James Lupton from Pro Boxing Fans. And I really want to get an insight into James, who's a boxing reporter, journalist. You know, he's running a social media company now, to get some inspiration to what he's seen in the world of boxing through being in boxing gyms and speaking to some incredibly famous people in boxing. So let's see what James says. Here we go. How was lockdown been with you, James, during what is a bit of a weird period for all of us?
It's not been too bad for myself. I mean, I was working from home a few days a week anyway, so for myself, it's not been too badly affected. It's just frustration, really. I love getting out, getting to the gym, seeing the fighters, seeing the trainers mixing and mingling, and speaking to them face to face.
Great point, yeah, and we enjoy doing these sessions. In fact, the good thing about this for me, mate, is that actually gave me an introduction to actually understanding and using Instagram a bit more doing these interviews, because I wasn't very good at it. But there's nothing beats getting into the gym and seeing the young people getting involved and speaking to the fighters and getting the buzz of when the next show's coming up, who's sparring, who's doing what. You can't beat that, can you?
Absolutely, it feels more real. It's more personable. As an interviewer, there's nothing worse than not feeling connected to the fighter.
Exactly.
So it's a case of meeting them. They know who you are, what you look like. I'll go to the gyms and I'll sit in there for 2-3 hours before I interview anybody, just to be around there, speak to them off camera, get to know them a little bit, let them get to know me. Because the fighters, they're going to be guys who do media all the time. And it's a case of, it's another interview, but I want to make sure it's more personable. I want the fighters to open up to me as a fighter, which is why it's so much easier face-to-face, in my opinion.
So talk us through, to get to the point where you are now, James, and where you are with Pro Boxing Fans. Talk us through a little bit of how you actually got into boxing itself then, because how long have you been in it? Because I've been involved in it about 4 years. Are you around the same time as me?
So I'm about 5 years, 5.5 years. So a little bit longer than yourself, but we must have met about 4 years ago ourselves. Around about when you first started, we first met. But I fell into it. I was just writing blogs about football to begin with. So this is about 6-7 years ago. I interviewed a few footballers, and the accessibility to footballers, you just can't get hold of them. So it was a dead end. I mean, I've got some good names, but I'd put out maybe one footballer a month. Whereas I tried boxing, and I was finding I could put out 2-3 interviews a day, because the blogs are so much more accessible. So it just literally started off a blog, a little WordPress page, just me interviewing people. And now I have no background in writing. I've got no degrees. I've got no GCSEs. I've got nothing like that in terms of qualifications. It was a case of I just one day decided, you know what, I enjoyed doing it. Done a few Q&As. So it's literally a case of I'd write down in this blog, it would be the question and their answer, as simple as that.
Yeah.
And it just evolved. I was going out and buying the magazines, Boxing Monthly, Boxing News, the Ring magazine. I was buying autobiographies, and I was studying the writing to improve my writing.
So how did you actually pick boxing? Because it sounds like you've gone to boxing from the football, as you said, the accessibility, being able to speak to fighters, and I see that all the time, is that you go up and chat away to them when you're out, if you're at your call and that, there's no airs and graces about it. There's nobody putting a hand in front of you can't talk to them. How did you pick boxing then? Why did boxing come into the sphere as opposed to any other sport?
So I was always into boxing. So when I was 14, I joined an amateur gym. Never did it seriously, never had no amateur fights, nothing like that. It was fitness for football.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But it was sort of a second sport as such. I'd watched bits and pieces. I wasn't a massive fan. I wasn't hardcore. I grew up, we never had Sky TV. I didn't have Sky TV until about 4 years ago myself. So, I'd never watched it growing up, anything like that at all. So it's just something that I fell into. But now, what I'm really interested in, now I look back throughout things that have happened through my life, and I believe a lot in destiny and fate, and I believe I was meant to be doing this. So things like, I remember growing up, so I lived locally to Barry McGuigan.
Right, okay.
And my mum, she's not a boxing fan, I doubt she's even watched a boxing fight in her life. But she would, every time when I grew up, she would always tell me about a story of her meeting Barry McGuigan. Oh, what a lovely man he is. I met him in Tesco's. Oh, yeah, no, do you know, yeah. And I always had that in my head. Oh, Barry McGuigan, what a nice man he is. And I used to work in a supermarket. I worked in a co-op for 7 years. And Barry McGuigan came in and I served him. So this is about, 15 years after my mum first started telling me about the story she met him. So I had that little buzz. I can go around and tell my mum, oh, I've met him now. But things like that, and it just all added up as I went through. And now I look back and go, actually, I met him there. When my first interview, boxing-wise, was Derry Matthews.
Right.
And I probably interviewed him about a year before I started doing any other interviews in boxing, once I was doing the football stuff. I don't know why, it's just somebody who followed me on Twitter. He followed me back and I thought, well, let's see if he'll get up for an interview. Like I say, I boxed a little bit as a youngster, not seriously. But I remember watching The Contender, first series, my favourite series I've watched. You know, I'd sit there and I'd watch it religiously. Sugar Ray Leonard was the presenter. I think he might be one of the team's coaches, and I can't remember. But that's what got me hooked. That and the Rocky films. But like I say, it's one of those things where I look back now and go, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm meant to be doing this, but just oblivious to it at the time.
Yeah. And just all these little pieces added together, and then you've finally made that jump from football over to boxing, and you've, I mentioned it just as we entered into this, just that you've interviewed quite a lot of people, and I started Boxing Saves Lives just at the beginning of lockdown. When it's like a non-profit organisation to, start shining a light on some of the great work that's done by coaches in our gyms. Because I don't think they get enough recognition. Things like, helping people of any age, improve physical and mental health, but also getting young people off the streets and away from harm. And I bet, during the course of your interviews and that, you've probably met some people and who've, been through some mad things in their life, with boxing's kind of been that big difference for them, straighten them out.
Absolutely. You hear a lot of stories of people who've been on the streets, they're street fighting, that's how they start boxing. I forget who it was now, but I interviewed somebody a few months back now, and they got into boxing because they were street fighting. They was only 4 or 5 years old, and their older brother was taking them out onto the streets, fighting the neighbourhood, placing bets on him, and then took him to a gym when he was sort of coming up to his teenage years. And it's refreshing to hear the turnarounds that they have. But I always enjoy listening to the stories who they've not grown up in poverty. I like the ones who do come from a more privileged background and they've chosen to do that. They've not, although it's not safe, not safe, boxing saves lives, and it certainly does, 100%. There are fighters who I've interviewed who have a bit of it that opens up and says, I'd be in prison or dead without boxing.
Yeah.
And it's so cliche to hear so many fighters say that, but it is true. People don't see any other route in life as a youngster. I look at myself when I grew up, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say I grew up in a bad area, but I grew up in an estate. And I look back now and there's people who I grew up with and hanged around with. I think there are 3 or 4 in prison for murder.
Wow.
There's some people who have been in and out for attempted murder. I remember there's one time when there's a friend of mine broke into another friend of mine's house and tried to kill him, stabbed him in the neck. Inch away, he would have killed him. Now, I wouldn't say for myself, boxing didn't save my life. I boxed a little bit as an amateur, in an amateur gym. I didn't compete at all, but it gave me something to do. It gave me something on a weeknight to go down there, same as the football, something to do, a little outlet to get away from the estate, away from the streets. And fighters, they don't have any other choice. I've spoken to people who said, I've asked them, why do you like to box? And they tell me simply they enjoy fighting, they can do it illegally and get paid for it.
Yeah.
Simple as that, because they've grown up fighting. It's all they know.
Yeah. And the sport, you mentioned at the start there about people who, it kind of warmed your heart to see people who are doing things, as you said, out on the street, getting into fights and all that craziness. But, one of the wonders of the sport is that it does straighten people out. It does give you structure. It teaches you that, not every fight needs to be fought. It teaches you that, controlling your aggression, that you should be more respectful when you're out there with other people. And it's amazing how the sport can do that to you. And yeah, it's about giving people second chances, isn't it?
It's the discipline that it gives. Now, I was only in the gym, so I went there just purely for fitness and football. And I was only in the boxing gym for 6 months to a year, not very long at all. And I only started because a few friends went there. I actually had a fight the week before. And I was like, oh, the lads were like, oh, come on, we're going to boxing. There's only 4 of us went down there. But the discipline you take from that, you take away with you. When, it's one of those, it's a tricky one because some don't, some will go to the gym so they can fight. They know how to fight. The guys I went with, they've all sort of gone down the route of drugs, drug dealing, fighting on the streets. Whereas myself, I saw it and I took it as, other people approached me looking for fights and I've walked away. I've never, apart from that one fight I had before I started in the gym, I've not had a fight since.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a naughty kid. I wasn't a troublemaker. I wasn't someone who went round and give it a digging all the time as such. I wasn't one of those kids, but I knocked around in those groups of people.
Yeah. And the thing is, in that situation, in that group, if you didn't have that kind of little bit of structure or you didn't understand the ideas of respect, you could get easily dragged into it. And we see a lot now at the moment with county lines now. We're talking about young people getting pulled into groups. 11 or 12 years old now, James, getting exploited, that's the word, by grown-ups, and, getting pulled into drug gangs and serving up drugs and, taking over, trap houses and cuckooing. It's insane, but it's weird how, we both know people who have been in that life as well. And you know what? It can be just an easy turn for people to begin with, and not everybody can get it. But I think our sport can actually help people come back from that life. Do you know what I mean? To get back to become the person they actually wanted to be to begin with.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a 14-year-old sister, and I would much rather she grew up when I was 14 than now. When I was 14, you'd have a few scraps, you'd be beat down on the street as such, but that would be it. Now, I mean, she's been in a few fights. She's in with the wrong crowd. She's coming to me and saying, "Oh, can I get a punch bag from the garden to let my frustrations out?" Now, she's not a fighter, but she's been attacked a number of times. I was on a bus and she was on the same bus as me. She came over and she had black eyes, scratches down her face.
Good God.
And I was like, "What happened?" She went, "Oh, these 2 girls jumped me." "Why'd they jump me?" "Oh, well, I caught their cousin a slag." I'm like, "Well, you need to avoid that situation."
Yeah.
But, back in the day it was, it's a bit of name calling and whatnot. And now it's a case of they're getting outnumbered. It's never a one-on-one fight these days. And I said to her, I think you've got to be careful because one day someone's going to have a knife.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. Bluntly, one day you will be in hospital if you're lucky.
And I guess nowadays you have social media. So, what used to be somebody said, "I'm going to fight." I remember my old school would be, I'll fight you at the bottom of the steps, or you're dead meat down the bottom of the steps with these massive steps. And next thing I remember getting bullied at school and that. You're sitting there in class and you're absolutely bricking it for what's going to come at the end of school. But nowadays, there might be 10 or 15 people I might know and turn up. But nowadays with social media, you could have half the school turning up to see you get beaten up outside, you know what I mean? Or getting caught in fight, or people can round and let's go and get that person. And it is a different world, isn't it? It's definitely a lot more scary, I think.
100%. I mean, even like that you say there. I mean, I remember in school seeing fights on a weekly basis, and it would be, you'd get people crowd round, but it'd still be 1-on-1 or 2-on-2, 3-on-3. There'll be no outnumbering. Whereas now it's seems to be the case that it's outside of school and it's outnumbered. Like I said, my sister's probably been attacked 3 or 4 times and it's never been 1-on-1. I said to her, to the point where I said to her, "Look, you punch them back and they will stop. I can guarantee that." Yeah. "Oh no, I'm not a fighter. I don't know how to punch." "What do you do then?" "Oh, I just curl up in a ball and let them kick me and stamp on my head and that." And it's like, it's not right. Do you know what I mean? It's not. And that's the problem with the kids these days. It's, like I say, there's peer pressure. So there's peer pressure in knocking about the right crew, seeming, "Oh yeah, I want to act around with the cool kids. If I'm not with those guys, I'm not popular." especially with social media, especially with females as well these days. Oh no, I need to look right, I need to lose weight, I need to be skinny, I need to look like this, I need to look like that.
Yeah.
You need to fit in as such. I think social media has absolutely ruined the generation coming through now, and future generations as well. I worry for.
It's funny you say that. I've spoken to two people over the last few weeks. We're doing these interviews, James. One of them was Kay Prosper, and the other one was Laura Payne. The former Team GB fighter who's going pro. And they both said the exact same thing. Now, Kay deals with a lot of kids showing pupil referral units, PRUs, who've been excluded from school. And he talks from that perspective of what they're seeing on social media in terms of, gang violence and all that. But Laura Payne, without wishing to be rude, she's a very attractive young woman. She's a very fit athlete and all of that. And she even said as well, that she's really worried about the impressions that are actually out there on social media and with the pressure that's actually put on young girls. And she's, you think, and she says to herself that, I wouldn't even like to be growing up in that kind of an age. Luckily, she just uses it just for her work and, for her boxing and that. But she said the pressures on young girls at the moment is absolutely horrendous. So you got both pressures on young boys in terms of gangs and being, part of a group, and the worry of something getting caught in a fight and it going on social media. And then the pressure of girls, as you said, to be perfect, to look beautiful, to look skinny, to look all this. It's a minefield, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you one thing, I don't know if you saw it on social media, something that I don't agree with is Australian fighter Ebony Bridges. So she's been putting out about so she's growing a social media following. Now, I think, fine, grow your fan base, etc., etc. But she's been doing it by putting out pictures of her in bikinis and lingerie. And
yeah.
there's been, she done an interview with somebody from over here in the UK, and basically the interviewer put out the video onto YouTube, and the caption was basically along the lines of something to do with sex faces, something to do with.
Yeah.
Now, for me, is that setting the right example? I understand you need to build your following. I understand you need to, as every fighter should be, they should be building a social media following and gaining a fan base.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're role models. They're in the public eye. And for young aspiring female fighters coming through, are they going to be wanting to see that and going, oh, should I be doing that?
Yeah.
Well, then, should I be posting pictures like this? Should I be talking like this? And I think if you're comfortable doing that, like she clearly is, then fine. But I don't think it's the right way to do it. I don't think it's the right impression to give to aspiring young female fighters.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it's, as you said, it is literally just starting to build up a following. I mean, I don't know about you, and the person you mentioned is that I've never even watched one of her fights, and I don't know anything about her. All I know is I've seen her being retweeted onto the timeline, and I go, okay, I know of her, but literally nothing really to do with boxing other than she's a boxer, So, and again, that's personal choice. She's a grown, she's making those choices, but the price is who's watching that, who's looking at that and going, oh, that's a good idea. It's a tough one, and
I actually unfollowed her because of it, because I got so sick of seeing it on my timeline and almost degrading herself to build that fan base. And I think, is it the right fan base you're trying to build?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point, And what is it? Just hype? I mean, is this somebody who may come to the UK and we may see the person fight, and maybe lots of people will then buy tickets, or what happens if it's literally just the goodwill of people sending messages on the internet, and horrible people as well? Actually, let's be honest, that's another thing that comes with it. Is it a price worth paying? That's a difficult question to answer, isn't it? If she turned up in the UK and 1,000 people turned up to watch her fight, then it's worth doing. If it's all she gets for the next 6 months before that even happens is a bunch of thirsty likes and a bunch of people saying horrible things to her on Twitter, then is that not going to take a toll on her mental health? Maybe.
Potentially, like I say, it's not only just the fact of being a role model. Like you said there, her mental health. What is it going to do for her in the long run? What if she decides one day, actually, I'm going to stop doing this. I've got my fan base. I've got, let's say, I don't know, 30,000 followers. I'm happy with that. Let's now build them into my boxing. What if then 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, she loses 20,000 followers because she's no longer posting these pictures or she's no longer talking like this and like that. What's that going to do for mental health, as you say?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And when I talk to coaches about trying to get young people off the streets and that, and one of the things Liam Conroy said to me the other day is he said, if these kids, if we can't get at them, help them earlier, he says, and they get in trouble, you can't get those years back. And it's the same for her. She can't get that time back now. Where if she, as you said, if she decides to focus a lot more on the boxing and change tack, she can't take that stuff back off the internet now. That's always going to follow her around. So, it really is down to personal choice. But as she's a grown up, she can do that. But yeah, it's when we're just talking purely on the theme of what people see when they're on the internet, then is it the right thing for young impressionable people to say? Hard to know.
Absolutely, I'll say it's more a case of being a role model. These young people, we want to encourage youngsters to join our sport. We feel it will help them, but are they going to go about it the wrong way if they see things like that? It's the point I'm trying to make there,
So what other kind of situations have you spoken to boxers about as well, James, in terms of, from back in the day, boxers who maybe from the wrong side of the tracks and stuff like that, and, there's a time a few years ago when, plenty of the boxers came from, rough backgrounds and that. And I know now we do, as you said, we do have like a lot more boxers from all over the area. But what kind of stories do you know from people who've been involved in the sport, from tough backgrounds?
All sorts. I mean, there's a guy called Daniel Egbenike, and I spoke to him during lockdown. I've spoken before as well. He's a lovely, lovely fella, good fighter, Southern area champion. He boxed as a youngster, so it must have been about, I think, between sort of 8 to 11 years old. When he was a kid, he was fighting. Just in an amateur club. He went down with his brother, enjoyed it. He then got into the wrong crowd. He was on the streets. He was drug dealing. He's been to prison, I believe, 3 times.
Right.
And he openly admitted to me the first time he went to prison, I can't remember how long the sentence was, but he spent a good few years in prison for drug dealing. And I asked him, what did you do? What did that teach you? What did you do during your time in prison? And he had made a plan on how to sell Class A drugs instead of what he was already selling. So he still hadn't learnt. Come out of prison, started selling Class A's, straight back where he was, back in prison again. By the third sentence, he decided, you know what, I need to straighten my life up. He had a daughter, and I think that was a kick in the arse that he needed. And he thought, right, well, I'm not good at anything else apart from boxing. I was good at boxing. It's the only thing I was ever good at. He just never stuck to it. Never had dedication. He was in and out between sort of, I'll say, young age up until about 16, and then street life took over. So he came back out of prison and he joined Three Kings Boxing Gym. I can't remember where it is now in London, but he joined there, and ever since then he's turned professional. I say he's now signed with MCK, trains with Kevin Lilly, he used to be a trainer at the Matchroom Gym. He helped out Tony Sims a lot there. And he's got his own gym now in Newlands Gym down in Essex. So he's now, on the straight and narrow. He changed his life around. And like I say, at each sentence he conjured a plan on what to do. Unfortunately, it wasn't until the third sentence that he conjured the plan to take the route of boxing. But these are the things, and these are stories that I hear regularly. I hear stories all the time about people boxing and getting into prison, because and even when I was growing up, I always said it's easy to make an illegal pound note than it is a legal pound note. As simple as that. I've got a friend who he was a drug dealer. He dealt cannabis from the age of 14, 15. He got nicked. He didn't do any time, but because he got nicked for possession, that was on his record. He couldn't get a job.
Yeah.
Every time he put a CV in, that was it. Nobody would hire him. So he was like, well, I'll move on to Class A, make more money.
Yeah.
I had another friend I went to school with. I say friends, people I went to school with, I should say. And he started dealing. He was homeless. He was sort of sleeping on people's sofas here and everywhere. So he's never spending out money as such because they were paying rent. earning a decent amount of money, and he ended up getting pinched. I think he done a year or two in prison. But by the time he'd come out, I think he had something to got 22 grand in the bank because of his dealing from before he went in. Didn't change him. He saw that money and gone, right, let's go carry on making more money.
Yeah.
So it's so easy for people to do that because the reward, the financial gain is there, and it's easily made. So unfortunately, it's easier to be a criminal than it is to pursue a normal career.
And that's the mentality that we're up against, really. And it's, you can get that, but then I often say to people is that what's the end game, really? Do you know what I mean? You get pinched, you get locked away for a long time, then eventually, and then where does it end? There's no, like, not everybody's going to end up buying a house like Tony Soprano. You know what I mean? That was just like fairyland. Even when you watch like programs on TV, sometimes it feels like an episode of The Wire that you're watching. And I've seen before some of the things that happened out on the street. It's actually quite scary. And although we think, there's money being made, actually at times it gets really hairy out there and people get really, really badly hurt because you'll have gang wars between people. And, no matter what age you are still susceptible and you're still out there and you're still hanging your there, and you could come to harm no problem. Because especially, county lines moving into other towns, they're pushing people out from different areas and towns. And people fight back in that, and there's, it might be money, but good God, I mean, where does it end, James? Where does it actually end?
When you say that, it goes back to the postcode wars. Now, I live in a city with 3 universities, and there are regular stabbings down here in the city, and every time it is because they've come down and it's somebody they knew from the previous gang or previous different postcode, and they go, right, well, if I go down there, I'm not local down there, they're not going to know who I am.
Right.
Of course, that's not how it is. The police talk to each other around other cities, you're going to get found out. But people's mentality is, oh, well, I won't get caught there. Things like that.
And it's no way to live, is it? It's, you wouldn't wish it anybody, any of your mates. You'd rather if they'd, got to see sense at the beginning or were able to find a way out of it once they're in it, But it's as you said, it's easy money, and young people getting trapped in it now and they're being promised easy money. That's how they get pulled in to begin with. You look at the trainers I've got, look at the shirt, look at the hoodie I've got this, that, or here's the iPhone. But some of them they'll be handed an iPhone. Oh, that's yours now, but actually it's got a tracking device. So no matter where they go, they're like, if that phone rings, you answer that. And no, wherever you are, if you don't, we can get to this person, we can get to that person. We know where your sister goes to school, and it's just a real frightening thing to even begin to imagine. So in some extent, it is an episode of The Wire where you're seeing young kids dealing drugs, but in the other sense, it's actually a hell of a lot worse. We just don't get to see it.
Absolutely agree.
So, James, how would you explain to somebody, having spoken to loads of people and being loads of gym, how would you explain to somebody the positives in terms of physical and mental health that comes from boxing?
I think a lot of it comes down to confidence, mentally. So, mental health side of things, you're confident. You almost lose that fear of if you were confronted. You'd know how to deal with yourself if you had to, but you'd also now have discipline to know to walk away.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's the massive thing. It's almost one of a matter of knowing to walk away. You're not going to be belittled for walking away.
Yeah.
It's the sensible thing to do. You're not going to be, you see James, he walked away from that fight. What? It's not. It's a case of, no, I don't need to do this, I don't need to do that. And it's knowing that you don't have to do so. Whereas, again, it comes back to peer pressure. With everybody going, oh, did you see such and such a fight? Yeah, well, how cool was that? Oh, yeah, this video of such and such having a fight went viral. And you think, and people can almost feel like, do I need to do that? Do I need to, because they're talking about it, if someone confronts me, do I have to do that because they'll think it's cool? Because it will go viral, because of this and that. But physically you can see it. You know, it keeps you fit. You're in shape. The only downside to it, obviously, longevity-wise, we see now with the CTE, things like that, the brain scans and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, that is a danger. You know, it's not. You know, it's not a pretend. It's not a healthy sport as such on that side of things.
In terms of, just for anybody who's watching, we watch it in terms of concussion for, you know, boxers for long term in the sport, basically. Yeah, so
absolutely, and
so careful, and that's why we have medicals every year to make sure, you know.
Exactly that. Also, inexperience, you know, in the gyms, if you don't know what you're doing in a gym, you know, it can happen out on the street. We see occasions where people have been punched outside a nightclub, they've dropped, and, you know, people have been killed just from one punch, and people go, oh, I've only hit him once. You know, that's not.
Sorry, yes, so you're just saying, you know, if somebody gets hit somebody out, you know, sees missed, hits somebody outside a nightclub, the person falls down, and they're thinking, well, I only hit him once.
Exactly. It's, you know, your fists are weapons. If, you know, without proper training, you're not going to know how to use them. You know, and it's not a case of needing to use them or wanting to use them, but you've got to use them the right way, the right discipline, and you've got to use them in the way for the sport. It's the only way to use them, you know.
That's a good point, and that's, you know, the beauty of boxing is that you're trained to, you know, use them when, and like you said, only when necessary, but also to use them to, you know, to defend yourself as well. You know, defend yourself at all time. That could be even a way to get out of things as well, just being able to defend yourself to begin with. But yeah, losing them as a last resort is the most important thing, and, you know, knowing what battles to get into. You know, you can even see, the funny thing is in boxes that you can watch boxing, you can see somebody even in the corner, you know, get the corner saying, right, don't get drawn into a fight, and next thing you know, the switch flips, and they're like, next thing they're stuck in the middle of a fight, and you're like, you won't be listening. And normally what happens is that person gets found out in a bit of sparring, they get stuck into something, you're like, oh, you weren't listening to your coach, and that's that discipline, isn't it? I bet you've been in corners, you've seen somebody, and you go, I've been sitting beside his coach. He hasn't listened to a word his coach has gotten said to him. And next thing he's in there getting stuck in. And the coach said, keep from distance, keep your jab, you know, let's keep it easy. And next thing he's in there windmilling away. You know, there's no way.
The funniest one I had in was at York Hall, and I watched it, and I sat front row near the corner, and I can't remember, it was a cruiserweight fight. It might have been Aussie Jervier and Jose Lopez, something like that it was. And one of them got dropped and jumped straight back up again, literally on a count of one. And he's called him and said, no, take the knee and, you know, recover, take an 8 count. So he's gone, okay then. So he's dropped back down again. And the referee's looked at it and gone, well, you can't stand up, and waved it off.
Oh, no.
So it's one of those, and it's, again, so important. But from a corner as well, they've got, I mean, really, they should only be talking to a fighter between rounds. So you've got, 30 seconds to a minute to relay a simple instruction, and the fighter's got to take that in. But again, that comes from years and years of discipline, of training, and also I suppose as well, sometimes it can come into play with the same coach. If you know somebody so well, you're going to listen to them a bit more, I think.
So, James, tell me a wee bit more about pro boxing. How did you get from what you were doing before in your round 8 stuff, mate?
So I went from, so I'll say, start my own blog. So round 8 was my own little blog.
Yeah.
And then from there, we moved on to Fight Talk. Myself, Sam O'Reilly.
Yes,
brought on Craig Scott on board. There was Adam Noble-Forsey, Tom Humber, with a few other little freelancers as well. And we tried to sort of do that for ourselves, at our own pocket. And I feel, you know, Fight Talk had a good following, it had a good reputation. And then whilst I was there, I got very lucky in the sense that I got some good interviews, some good names, and I always try to better myself. So at the time, I was essentially sending out good bits of work that I felt were good that I'd done, and I'd send them to, you know, bigger names, writers, publishers, editors, and just ask for feedback. You know, I wouldn't say, oh, look how good this is. I'd say, look, where can I improve? What have I got to do to change this? What will make this better? I had a few guys who would help me out massively. So I had Donald McRae, who would help me. He told me a few pointers here and there. Paul Zanon, who's been a massive help. He still is to this day. A good friend of mine now, and
this is the creme de la creme. Let's be like Don McRae and not writing for the Guardian, and like Paul Zanon has wrote some awesome books, written some fantastic autobiographies. So these are, we don't have hierarchies in boxing in terms of journalists, but because everybody, like you just said, everybody gets along together and people will help each other, which is great. But they really are, absolutely very prestigious writers, aren't they?
Absolutely, and that's why I went to those guys. Like I say, not looking to put myself out there, it was to improve myself.
Yeah.
And I got lucky, so I interviewed Carissa Shields a few years back now.
Yeah.
And I'd done the write-up for fighttalk.net, and I sent that out and said, look, this is my latest piece, please give me any feedback on how to make improvements on it. And Mark Butcher come back to me, and he was one of the editors for Boxing Monthly magazine, and he wrote for them every month. He would be in there. He's written books. Luke Whitney's written books, but Mark Butcher, he would be in the magazine and online regularly, and he came back to me and he said basically along the lines of, look, your style of writing reminds me of mine. And he told me he'd already actually read that piece before I sent it to him, so he'd been keeping an eye on my work. And he said, listen, anything else you've got unpublished, send to me and I'll stick it on a Boxing Monthly website. So for me, it's a massive platform. So I was like, right, okay. So I started going on to the Boxing Monthly website. I was getting on there regularly. My first piece for those guys online was Nick Webb, the heavyweight from Brighton. And that continued whilst I was still writing for Fight Talk, and done a few YouTube videos for Fight Talk at fight nights, things like that. I then started getting into the magazine, Boxing Monthly magazine. So that was when I decided to stop writing for Fight Talk, purely because I wanted to give all my best writing to Boxing Monthly, and I just didn't want to mug those guys off with, potentially, basically anything that the guys at magazine or online didn't want. I didn't want them to feel like I was just offloading tat to them as such. So I said, look, they're a big platform. I think their social media is like 20,000 plus followers, compared to 5,000 or whatever it was on Fight Talk. So I said, look, I'm only going to improve by getting my name out there and being in this sort of company. So I started writing for those guys, and in, I think it was space of 13 months, I got into 10 issues of the magazine. Obviously, they're only once a month, so I was a almost permanent fixture in there, which was fantastic. So for me, it's all, and it wasn't about being paid by those guys or anything like that at all. It was the pride of walking to WH Smith down the road and seeing my work in a magazine on the shelf.
Yeah.
So I was doing that. Pro Boxing Fans, so it's owned by another guy, and he essentially reached out to me and asked me to do some freelance work for him.
Oh, okay. Right, yeah.
So for YouTube interviews. So asked me to go on a job at the Oscar Rivas Dillian White press conference.
Aha, right, okay.
So popped down there with a guy who used to work for them. He was my cameraman essentially, and I had to do all the interviews. Went really well. The boss liked it, and I was a bit cheeky. So what I'd done was I turned around and I said to him, I said, by the way, if you need me for the Lomachenko Luke Campbell press conference, I've booked it off work. So I dropped the seed in, and he texted me a week or two beforehand and said, look, we're going to use you for it. Come down. I said, fine. So and I went down there, and this time the cameraman was the guy who owns it, so the director of the company. Okay. So he wanted to see firsthand what I can do. We went around, and there was a few interviews there that I hadn't prepared for because there are people there who I didn't expect to be there.
Right. Yeah,
so
that's a tough one. Yeah.
So it was a lot of work on your feet there and then on the spot as such. So I managed to interview without any preparation, literally just there and then saw them, grabbed them, and literally wing it essentially throughout. Was Bob Arum. And George Groves was also there, who I didn't expect to be there.
You know what I mean? Bob Arum, brilliant, is obviously probably the oldest promoter, most experienced promoter in the planet right now. And what I love about Bob Arum is you watch any shows on TV and he's actually sitting in the crowd watching them, even at very, very early undercard. He loves boxing through and through. And then getting the chance to sit down or to have a stand-up interview with George Grove, brilliant, amazing.
Exactly that. And do you know what? The thing that always sticks out to me, I'll never forget, is I walked out afterwards and I was with the director and he said to me, "Oh, it's good that you know them. I've seen these guys before I met them." And I said, "I've never met them before." He said, "What, you've never met George Groves before?" I said, "No." He went, "Well, you got on really well, like straight away the rapport was there." I said, "But that's what you need to be an interviewer."
Yeah.
And the fact that he was so taken aback, was like, "Oh, so you've never met none of them?" I've never met nobody. I think the only person that was trying to think who was on the undercard now, I don't think I've met anybody on that undercard. It was literally first time interviews with them all, and he was so shocked of the quick rapport building.
Yeah.
That he was like, "Okay, well," and then basically so that was August 31st. The fight was, and a few weeks later we had a little discussion. He said, "Look, I want to take you on." I was working in a insurance brokerage at the time.
That's what I was going to say, because you said, like all of us, like I work a 9 to 5 now, not doing the boxing sales days, but everybody do in this, like until they actually start working for somebody big, then even when you're writing for Boxing Monthly, you're still working a full-time job. Yeah,
I mean, I think to my knowledge, everyone there at Boxing Monthly, all the writers were working full-time jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, the online editor is a school teacher. So that's a long-houred, tough job anyway. So for me, I worked in what I've been doing. I've been working in insurance for 4 years.
Yeah,
4 and a bit years. So I was doing 9 till 5. At the time of when I went over there, the insurance brokers I was only there for 3 months, but it was a bit further away than where I was used to working. So I was leaving the house at 7 a.m. I was getting home at 7 p.m. if I was lucky, and then still interviewing, writing, different speeches when I get home. So, I had to basically decide on financial or enjoyment, essentially.
Yeah.
And I just said, you know what, I can't sit on a bus for nearly an hour every morning thinking I should be here today, I could be there today. And all the what ifs and that, I just said to him, no, it's not about money for me. It's, so I'm not a greedy person. For me, it was get what I need to survive. It's not as long as I can pay the rent, pay my bills, get to places I'm travelling, then fine by me. I'm doing what I enjoy doing.
So no regrets from your changeover from your insurance job. You're moving forward with this, and it's all looking really good. Absolutely
not. No, do you know what? Every day, it doesn't feel like I'm working.
That's good.
Although there's a lot that goes into it, I'm enjoying it. I get to speak to the people that I want to speak to. When I first started this 5-6 years ago, I set myself a little list of who I felt was realistic targets, but big names, people that I wanted to speak to. And there's only a list of 4 people. And 2 weeks ago, I got the last name on that list.
Can you tell me who it was?
Yeah, so the list of 4 was the first person I ticked off the list was Tyson Fury.
Yeah.
Then it was David Hay.
Cool.
Amir Khan.
Yeah.
And more recently was Christy Martin.
Ah.
So a little bit of a different one. I've not seen many interviews with her, and I managed to get her a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Oh wow, God! I'm so pleased for you, James, because I know we only met briefly a few years ago, but we all kind of look after each other's backs and that on social media and retweet each other and that. And I just wanted to say thank you, mate, for doing this interview with me today. My Instagram's clicking up a little clock, so we've got a minute left. But I just wanted to say thanks a million for the interview, man. It's lovely to get a little bit of an insight behind what happens with boxing. And I know you said boxing didn't save your life, but how it's given you a life that you would want, to where you can work for yourself and do all of this stuff that you really enjoy. And it gives you a good boost to beat that 9 to 5 and not having that 1 hour train or 1 hour travel to work every day. So it's definitely been life changing for you, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I can't imagine life like any differently now. Do you know what I mean? It's certainly changed it for the better.
Lovely. Thanks a million, James. Take care, buddy.
JP, thanks, mate. Bye-bye, mate.